So I will begin with a disclaimer here. I'm not a specialist in scientific epistemology. I'm not a specialist in scientific modeling. So I think my contribution, and I envision it to be a modest contribution, hopefully a follow-up on what Professor Schnell presented, where I think we share something together. And I'm fascinated to see a biologist who actually does care for first principles. And I would like to emphasize the importance of first principles, once again, in general, for scientific understanding and in particular in biology and biological modeling, and ask a question: to what extent contemporary modeling in biology is and can or could be causal. Okay, so the plan is this. I will say a few words. I should have envisioned that having this many guests from Notre Dame, everything would be said already about principles of scientific knowledge, but I will just briefly mention it to locate within this scheme the importance of causal modeling and reflect a little bit on Aristotle's causal modeling. And then a contemporary, very briefly, Aristotelian causal modeling of living beings, and eventually a reflection on modeling in contemporary biology. So again, I begin with Aristotle's ideal of scientific knowledge, which, as has been mentioned here several times already, episteme is the superior kind of knowledge, of knowing, expressed in certain and necessary conditions that enable us to attain truth with certitude. This is truth known with certitude, achieved by someone who can successfully identify what the cause that makes a fact to be what it is. So again, probably one last time, I go to posterior analytics, where Aristotle says, to this quotation in particular, where he says, unqualified scientific knowledge of a thing, we possess it when we think that we know, again, the cause of which the fact, on which the fact depends, as the cause of that fact and no other, and further that that fact could not be other than it is. So Aristotle is himself aware of how difficult it is to achieve this sort of knowledge. So he is introducing and discusses other types of knowledge, as we all know. Knowledge that is just probable, though not absolutely certain. And it would be for him an assent to a proposition rather than to its opposite, with an awareness that it may be actually false and the opposite may be true. So knowledge that is probable and not absolutely certain. So it is less than episteme, but still more than pistis, in Latin persuasio, which is characteristic of somebody who find it difficult to decide between two or more opinions, but nonetheless we make the decision we are inclined. And Aristotle obviously discusses the ways in which people are actually persuaded to take one of those positions, appealing to emotions or the authority or the character of the person who is persuading. William Wallace, in his modeling of nature, he pays attention to one other category that he has, endoxa, which is still an opinion, but reputable or expert opinion, which will be the highest degree of opinion, which the most closely resembles actually episteme, which may be still referred to truths that are partial and obscure. And this is important because from the Aristotelian point of view today, we could think about contemporary science as a part of or a kind of opinion, but this may be a special type of opinion, which is again endoxa. The nomenclature is different, obviously. Today we would say that science is justified true belief. So why do I say all this? Well, because maybe someone could say, if the ideal that is available for science is endoxa, so maybe first principles are not that important in scientific inquiry that we pursue today. Well, I think that wouldn't be the case for Aristotle because, again, endoxa would still be grounded in some ways in which we know again about causes. So when therefore there's another important aspect of this conversation here, or approaching scientific inquiry nowadays from the perspective of Aristotle. When we think about the ways in which this highest ideal of knowledge is approached or achieved, this is again through demonstration. It has been emphasized in this conference several times. And Aristotle will have, as we know, the distinction between direct demonstration and indirect demonstration, and direct will then be divided into something that he cares the most, it seems, knowledge of the reasoned fact. In Latin we say, or we call it knowledge propter quid, and knowledge of the fact. So the first one, as we know, goes from causes to effects, and the second begins with effects with a hope that we can find the causes. So again, the same quotation: the premises of demonstrated knowledge must be true, primary, immediate, better known than and prior to the conclusion, which is further related to them as effect to the cause. So again, a scientist may say, well, in natural hard sciences, it doesn't seem like the pure knowledge of causes is available to me in any way. But then Aristotelian would say, don't worry, because what is available to you is knowledge of the fact. You can begin with effects, as you actually do in your science. And Aristotle would favor it in a way, or appreciate it. Why? Because in demonstration quia, which begins with the knowledge of the fact, within this demonstration we can actually make causal inferences where we assign a remote cause. Maybe we may not be able to assign a proximate cause, but at least a remote cause which will function as the middle term. He gives an example of the negative demonstration that of this type, of causal type, when we say that the wall does not breathe because it is not living. So the proximate cause of not breathing is not having lungs. You may have animals who are alive but do not breathe because they don't have lungs. But the more remote cause in this case would be, again, to say that the wall does not breathe because it is not alive, and it actually explains. So in this way, demonstration quia can lead you to knowledge, and then we have another possibility which doesn't actually point towards any particular cause, either proximate or remote, but still may make or may help us a sort of inquiry or demonstration that can allow us to make a suggestion that there is some sort of cause, and we may simply allude to some possible characteristics of this cause, and this matters. Why does it matter? Well, Renaissance Aristotelians claim that Aristotle himself seems to be saying that sometimes it happens that a reasoning process leading only to knowledge of the fact, and then maybe remotely assigning causes to this fact, this kind of knowledge may actually indirectly supply an explanation from which knowledge of the reason fact, even this the highest standard of knowledge, can be obtained. It is commonly known that Jacopo Zabarella is one of those who build on this thought present in Aristotle, and he defines this approach as demonstrative regress, right? And quote, he defines it as a kind of reciprocal demonstration in which, after we have demonstrated the unknown cause through the known effect, we convert the major proposition and demonstrate the same effect through the same cause, now knowing it as a cause, so that we know why the effect exists. So he therefore claims that purely demonstrative method is most appropriate in mathematics, whereas what he calls demonstrative regress would be most appropriate and applicable in natural science. Why? Because in mathematics, causes are known better than their effects, while in natural sciences, well, again, we begin with effects, and we at least initially know them better than causes. So demonstrative regress for Zabarella can be a demonstration from effects, and in this way it becomes a discovery of a cause. But it can be also simply an induction, and this obviously goes back to Aristotle, who appreciates induction obviously as well, which can be used for the discovery of something that is utterly unknown. So therefore, causal knowing and knowing causes and causal inference would be absolutely crucial for Aristotelian approach to science. So you just could not stay within the level of just phenomenological description of reality. So a few words on this, on Aristotle and his modeling of causes. I will say in a minute why I say modeling of causes. So again, the goal or summit of scientific operation and explanation is the knowledge of the reason fact. But knowledge of the reason fact is knowledge of the cause. And we have established that it is possible to reach this goal. Therefore, scientific explanation would be for Aristotle definitely a causal explanation. Now, the question that I think we could ask here would be this: what kind of grasp of causes we may have? I think there might be a tendency among Aristotelians to simply think that we have, indirect, especially in the context of scientific inquiry, grasp, but still indirect. But eventually, we have a grasp of, let's say, formal or final cause, which is in one way or the other understood in a univocal way, which I think is not the case in Aristotle himself. I think what he actually does is that he is modeling causes. So he's going, beginning from in science through induction, we can reach the causes of things, but we can actually reach them only through modeling, scientific modeling that leads us to philosophical modeling. And I think this is expressed in the flexibility of terminology that he actually uses for causes. And I think it's not, it's not without meaning or without importance that he actually uses many terms for all four causes. So I tried to enumerate them here. Like when we think about formal cause, so we have eidos, which is outward appearance. We could think paradigma as also a formal or have a formal interpretation of this term in his writings. Then we have logos and even the Platonic notion of idea. It is also in Aristotle's corpus related to formal cause. We have holon and synthesis, right? That comes from as a union of parts. We then have morphe and schema, or schema or scheme, and then those that we claim to be most profound, totienei nai, and I would add to it entelekia, which will be formed as expressed in its final mature state of being. So we have all this machinery, categorical machinery that he uses, and on top of this, we have this crucial distinction between substantial and accidental form, which you can then apply to all those, at least most of those terms that are listed here. So I think this is his way in which he is modeling formal cause. Then we go to material cause, right? So that out of which something is generated, ex who. Then hyle, but prote hyle, right? There are passages when he speaks hyle, there are passages when he speaks prote hyle. Hypokeimenon physis, proton hypokeimenon, or even this notion of antecedent, which necessitates in some way, because it has privation to it, necessitates a consequent. Then when we go to efficient cause, again, we have a number of terms that he uses. Arche as a source of or beginning or of change or of coming to rest. Hot hen, maker or agent, that which starts the process of change. And then at a meta level, in a way of description, he does introduce the distinction between immanent and transient efficient causation, crucial for the definition or understanding of life among Aristotelians. And then obviously primary and secondary causation, efficient causation, developed later on by scholastics. And again, last fourth cause, again, a number of terms. Telos as purpose or end, harin as that for the sake of which, agathon as the good. There is a normative aspect to teleology. And again, I would repeat entelekia here as, again, form expressed in its final or mature state of a given being. So Aristotle is so he believes, I guess, I believe that he believes that we have access to causes, but we have to model them. Because there are different functional modes of all four causes that are applied in our attempts at understanding phenomena that we deal with and we explore in natural science. So when we think about the contemporary, then Aristotelian causal modeling of living beings, then I would say that the contemporary Aristotelian scholar, he would be happy to go with a biologist enumerating the properties of life, and we could spend much time on each one of these, but I would just offer a list of them: metabolism, homeostasis, active information cycling systems within living systems, growth, developmental processes, reproduction, sensation, motion or locomotion, and then those specific for human beings. So these are called in contemporary philosophy of biology properties of life. So this we would share with biologists, but Aristotelians would be unhappy with just this phenomenological enumeration of properties of life, where when scientists are trying to coin a definition of life, which, as we all know, has not yet been achieved, the definition of life that everybody would agree with, they simply work within this number of enumerated properties, whereas the difficulty of the definition is simply there in their approach, where they are trying to pick up and choose which one of these is important, or maybe all of them are important, but then how do we make one definition that gets or takes all of them, brings all of them together? So Aristotelian scholar would say we value this enumeration and we study it. But then there is something more profound, deeper ontological questions that we ask. Not simply enumerating this, but we ask, why do living things express or show those properties? Why do they continue as wholes? Why do they process energy in a way that maintains their inherent stability? What grants their capability of flexible control of their internal dynamism? What grants the animate entities powers to grow, reproduce and evolve and so forth, and even die in a seemingly organized way? So here we would implement this again causal machinery that goes beyond simply efficient causation, but refers to all four causes and we would say that those properties of life can or should be described as dispositions or powers that are grounded in, well, I would say various functional modes that I have enumerated before of specific, this formal, material, efficient, and final causes, which provide for the unity, a unique kind of unity of those living beings. So again, to understand life and everything that happens within living organisms, a robust notion of causation is needed. So now I'm moving to modeling in contemporary biology, because the question that an Aristotelian scholar that is interested in this entire conversation of modeling in biology would ask would be, to what extent modeling in biology is causal, and to what extent it approaches this more robust notion of causation. So I did, over last several weeks, I was reading a number of articles and publications on modeling in philosophical approach to modeling in biology. So I saw that there are at least two main distinctions of models in biology from the point of view of philosophy of biology. These are, so one distinction, or one list distinguishes between experimental models, which may range from actual organisms to physical representations of these organisms, mathematical models, which range from purely deterministic to purely stochastic models, and computational models. So those who work on this division of types of models in biology, they emphasize that their implementation in biology varies with respect to different divisions of biology. So they say that biochemists, cell biologists, molecular biologists favor experimental models and see them as being about large classes of organisms, where differences among species are noise, and species and related species provide an information that is redundant. So Professor Schnell mentioned it before. I found that almost all research in molecular biology involves less than 10 species, which are considered to be model species. But then ecological and evolutionary biologists, they prefer more mathematical models and find them helpful in their study of, well, hundreds and thousands of species, where differences among them are treated as signal and not noise, and those models are thought to capture those differences. Another division that I found, which I think is very interesting, is the distinction between three types or cultures of modeling in biology. The first one is, well, this is described in philosophy of biology as causal modeling in biology, therefore interesting for us here, I believe. Then data-based statistical modeling and algorithmic computational modeling in biology. So I will go shortly through all three of these. So the first is causal modeling in biology, which is grounded in, so this is like the old school modeling in biology that was important, especially in the first half of the 20th century, grounded heavily in experimental biology, and prior to the aid coming from the big data science. So the idea here is to represent idealized features of structural composition and biochemical causal pathways in organisms, populations, or even entire ecosystems. And the crucial role here is the role of idealization. We just have a particular nature here because it is, I think, to large extent subjective and arbitrary. This is a particular decision of the particular scientists about things that they will not put into the model that may not be relevant to this the modeling that they pursue. So the conversation here is whether this idealization is more Aristotelian or Galilean in its nature. I tend to think that rather the latter is true, that these are deliberate distortions rather than putting in brackets things that are not relevant and will not change the outcomes of this type of modeling. So why is, I mean, again, idealization is crucial. So for example here, when an ecologist modeling in this way creates a model of population dynamics, he or she chooses whether or not there is a single population, whether or not a population is finite, whether or not two sexes are present in this population, whether or not individuals made randomly or not, whether or not the number of offspring produced is finite, whether or not there is an environmental variation, and so forth. So all these aspects are taken into account, and decisions in a way have to be made. And therefore, the outcome of this high level of idealization is that some causal models assumptions could never be supported by data. So, for example, in the same model, it is never true that a population has an infinite size, which may be assumed for the sake of the model, or that individuals have infinite number of offspring, or that environment is always constant, etc. Okay. So, interestingly, statistical analysis that even when it enters here and large or big data science, when it enters this type of modeling, still it may not inform the choice of model alternatives. So the question is would be whether nowadays this model is still viable or not at all, and it should be abandoned. It has been very influential and critical for a number of important discoveries in the 20th century. Just a few examples. The discovery of the correct mechanism for the replication of DNA helix, reconciliation of the generic mechanisms underlying traits that vary discretely and that vary discretely, and those that vary in a continuous way. Development of population genetic models, and eventually a highly influential and important model that brings together micro and macro evolution. So what are the difficulties of this type of modeling in biology? Well, the main problem of this modeling is the level of acceptable deviation from the predicted basis on prediction based on the idealized causal models. So how large can this deviation be, right? And still allow us to conclude that the model provides a meaningful explanation of a particular phenomenon. At which point does it tell us that our model is incorrectly formulated? When can we assume that the model is correctly formulated, but prediction based on it is incorrect or is not instantiated in nature? So those who are critical about those models, they say that we end up here with an inferential ambiguity. There are few agreed upon standards by which success and failure are judged. So these models would be highly subjective. And the criteria would be, in many cases, arbitrary. What is the nature of, but from my perspective, another question would be, and a crucial one, if these are causal models, what is the nature of causation that is being modeled here? Are we still within the context of causal reductionism, or maybe they help us to achieve causal non-reductionism? So is causation still reduced to efficient causes here, or maybe we can go beyond? In what way models that are offered here would line up with contemporary models of causation, regulatory or counterfactual views, interventionist views of causation that seem to be, I would think that would be one of those models that would be crucial for this type of modeling. Maybe probability view of causation, or to what extent they would be open, for example, to dispositional view of causation. And I think this is an open question. The second type of models that in a way replaces or I should say develops on causal models but brings them into a completely new area or new regions of explanation or exploration of reality is data-based statistical modeling in biology, where it aims at extracting meaningful insights from long-term large and complex observational data sets to construct models to test causal hypotheses about biological processes. So the scientists, as Professor Schnell explained, they choose an underlying statistical model in one way or the other that they believe generate the data, and then try to use this model to make inferences about further inferences about those observed data. Now, this is interesting that this strategy, one may think it's not causal, it ceases to be causal, it's becoming statistical and phenomenological more, but there's a number of thinkers who claim, no, it actually allows us to make still causal inferences which are here very interesting because they may be made in contexts where controlled experiments are impossible for various reasons. But I think that if causal inferences can be made here, they would circulate around the probability view of causation, where causation in question would be an efficient cause, and it will be defined in terms of raised probability of a given occurrence of a given phenomenon. So, for example, I think based on this type of modeling today, we oftentimes have causal inferences where, for example, mutations in DNA sequence would be identified as being potentially disease-causing, right, solely by the strength of their statistical association with the disease and not by their consequences for the function of the associated protein in a given biochemical pathway. So the difficulties of this modeling, well, the assumptions routinely made about the modeling underlying the data are often unknown, of unknown validity at best, says Brayman. The criteria by which associations are judged to be significant or not are arbitrary and may often lead to incorrect conclusions, which was pointed out before. So this is the second, so these are main problems of this modeling. And then eventually we have the third modeling culture that is entering biological research, which is algorithmic modeling in biology. In this approach, we introduce automated procedures to make predictions from data. So we insert those black boxes which do the work, but we actually are not aware of how those neural networks work. So this is, on the one hand, very promising tool, because of the simple fact that investigator can avoid much of the hard work needed to construct, analyze, and validate a causal model of data. And this allows biologists to tackle analyses which were previously absolutely impossible to address. But at the same time, not at the same time, another important aspect, machine learning analysis in many subdisciplines in biology demonstrate that prediction and causal understanding of many-dimensional complex systems can be attained even when many, but not all parameters can be measured and when likely relevant equations are insoluble. So it is a very promising method, which, and I'm coming to the conclusion slowly, which the promise of especially big data-based modeling and computational algorithmic modeling is that the hope is that we will be able to grasp better the complexity of biology, which will be based on the interplay of molecular reductionist and organismal non-reductionist, well, from philosophical point of view, maybe emergentist approaches. But now again, the question that I would have, and this is, I will end up with a number of questions. What are the causal categories proper for research and modeling in biology, and what are the causal categories that are in play here? Again, has causal reductionism been overcome, or will this methodology help us to overcome causal reductionism in experimental biology? Well, when we think about the entire study of biological information, we find those, many who actually claim that past the limits of genocentrism, we realize that biology requires a richer concept of information, quantitative and qualitative notion of information, one that includes semantic and teleological aspects. And the answer to this need is a teleo-semantic or teleo-functionalist concept of biological information, where biological information is, in its quantitative and qualitative aspects, is not only a derivative of an epiphenomenon or an epiphenomenon of the dynamically understood material structure of a given animate being, but it explains it. I would add ontologically grounds it. Now, I find those claims more in philosophy of biology than in, I think, in biology. So again, the question would be to what extent this conversation can happen between biologists and philosophers of biology and metaphysicians. So does this approach that we are dealing with, again, reintroduce or reopen the way back to more classical and robust Aristotelian notion of causation? I think it's an open question. And there's a number of other questions that are asked that I encountered in this literature on biological modeling from the philosophical point of view again. Biological models and the notion of biological law. What is the relation here, whether we do have biological laws the way we have them in, let's say, physics and chemistry, where biology is a historical science, and do we have models which apply to all cases of a given biological phenomenon at all? And if not, what are they? Biological models and biological theory. So the understanding of biological laws and the entire conversation of biological laws affects, obviously, the conversation on what a biological theory is. And then the question, what is the role of models in constructing biological theories, is an open question here too. And then simply ontology of biological models and epistemology of biological models. These are all questions that we are left with. So I guess I'm just adding to the confusion in this entire conversation rather than bringing solutions. But yeah, this is all I wanted to, that's all I wanted to present. So thank you for your attention.